Hello and welcome to our course where we're going to be practicing and learning more about interacting with the DOM, updating elements, element manipulation, building out a fun interactive application that I like to call the DOMinator from scratch. My name is Lawrence and I'm going to be your instructor for this course. I come to you with many years of web development experience and I'm ready to help you learn more about JavaScript. The application that we're building today is going to help you learn more about the DOM, give you the ability to create a fun interactive application that you can utilize to practice and get more familiar with working with the DOM. The way that it works, an input area where we can select any one of the divs. We can also dynamically create additional brand new divs. And if we click those divs that are on the page that are within our active area, they disappear, they get removed from the screen. And they also get removed from the drop-down list. So we can only select the ones that are currently on the page, and we can make whatever updates we want to them, including updating the content that's contained within them, updating the background color, updating the text color, and we can toggle various classes that we have preset, toggling the classes, removing and adding those classes. Well, of course, we can create brand new divs. Then you can select those, update those, just as we've updated the other divs, the content that's contained within them, as well as the background and the text color. The way the course is run, I'm going to have the code editor on the left-hand side. For most of the part, it's going to be open, and on the right-hand side, we'll have the browser open with the application running. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of HTML and CSS code. HTML and CSS are prerequisites to this course. We're going to be running through that fairly quickly because the objective of this course is to learn more about JavaScript and practice DOM interaction. In addition, JavaScript fundamental and core concepts are prerequisites to this course, as this course is focused on DOM and DOM manipulation. That's source code has been included, so I do suggest that you try the code out for yourself, get more familiar with what you can do with the code, try it out for yourself. See how it works. If you have any questions or comments or need clarity, I'm always happy to help within the Q&A section of the course. So I know you're excited to get started. So coming up next, we're going to start building this application out. Hello and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to be setting up some HTML, setting up an element that we can use from JavaScript in order to make our selection and update some of the element properties. So the first thing that we want to do is select that element. And currently on the page, all we're going to have is that one div, and currently it's an empty div. There's nothing written in it. And I'm going to write hello world within the div, refresh it, and you can see it appears on the screen. So that's all we currently have for content within the page. And we're going to use JavaScript in order to select that element. And because it's going to be selecting that instance of that element, connecting to that element, you can use const in order to make your selection and give it a variable name. And then using the document object, so document and query selector method, go ahead and select the element. And because we only have the one div, our selection process is fairly simple and straightforward. Once you've made the selection of the element, that means that you've connected that element to this object name and you can utilize it in JavaScript. So if you output it in your console, you're going to see that cell element shows up. Also, additionally, we're going to be creating a few other elements. So we're going to create an input. So this is just a regular text input. And I'll show you how you can get the contents of that, as well as the contents of the div in the upcoming lesson. And then also we're going to be adding an event listener to a button. So currently we'll give it a name, and this can just be first name. And also we'll put a default value here and we'll close that off. So the same way that we selected the div, we're going to select the input, and I'm going to call it select input. Actually, we'll call it SC input. So that's an SCI, capital INPUT. And the same way that we made the selection with query selector, go ahead and make a selection of the input. And you can select it by the tag name, and you can also be more specific because we do have a name value. So in case you've got more than one input, you can make a more precise selection using the name attribute. So now that we want to select that input, we can see that we've got the connection to that value. And if we do want to see the value that's contained within there, we can type that out and do value, and that's going to return back the current value of Lawrence. Whereas the select input, and if we do text content, that's going to return back that current value of the text that's contained within that element. So go ahead and try this out. And coming up next, we're going to add a button and introduce adding and listening for events. So that's still to come in the upcoming lesson. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be listening for an event on an element. So creating another asset within our HTML, we're going to create a button element, and we can just call this submit. And then when we refresh it, we see we've got added in a submit button. So the same way that we did last time where we created variables in order to connect to our elements, we're going to do the same thing using query selector and selecting that button element. And if you do have more than one with the button tag, then you can be more specific. You can add in a class or you can add in an ID. And there's a number of different ways that you can make these selections. So if you are selecting by a class, and we'll give this class a button, a BTN class, I can also select via the BTN class. So it actually doesn't matter. I'm able to make the selection. And if we have more than one element that meets the criteria, if we have more than one button, it's going to simply select out the first one. So even if we have more than one, you're going to see what happens here when I type in BTN, we're always going to be related to the first one. And that's the one that's getting highlighted right now within Chrome. So you see, and if we do want to make a selection on a button, and if it's not the first one, then again, we do need to be more specific, and we need to have a way to differentiate the content within the buttons. So now that we've connected the button, let's add an event listener to that button. So selecting the button object, add event listener, and the event that we're going to listen for is a click. So we need to specify the event. And then also we add in a function that's going to handle that event. So right now within the function, we can simply console log out and we can type in click. So now when we go and we refresh the page and we hit submit, you can see that our output in the console is click. So if we can take this one step further as well, and we can output this. And what this will be, this will represent the element that made the event fire off. So activated the event on this particular element, so it's representing the current button that made the click. So we can check to see some of the button contents, we can get class, and we can get this object information this way. And as well, this is going to be the same thing as BTN object. It's going to represent the same item within the DOM. So if I refresh and if I do this, you're going to see that both of them are the same. They're representing the same object within the DOM. We also have an event option that we can track within the event listeners as well. So if we output this and we output event, this is also going to represent the element that triggered the event, but it's going to also have some additional information. So we can see the element that provided the source, the target, which was the button. So if we did event target, that's going to actually represent that same element that initiated the event to fire off. So there's multiple ways in order to get the information, and using the event object, this gives us some additional information on the event itself, as well as we can navigate to the target. We can use this to simply get the target of whichever element triggered the event, or we could use our BTN, which was the way that we made the selection of the object. So now that we've got an event listener, we want to make something happen. And that's coming up in the next lesson. So go ahead and add in your event listener. And coming up, we're going to select the input and output the value of the input into the select element. So what's going to happen is when I hit submit, the div content will update to Lawrence. And I'll show you how to do that in the upcoming lesson. Welcome back. This lesson, we are going to update some of the content on the page, mainly within the div, getting content from the input as the user takes an action on the submit button. So let's put this all together. And we already have everything in place. We saw earlier that we can get the element input content by doing sc input value, because we've attached sc input variable to that object within the DOM. So if we get the value of it, we can return back whatever the current value is. So if this value updates at any point, and whenever we look for the value, you can see that we can also get that updated value. So whatever that value currently is within the input, that's what we want to return back. And we also saw that we can get the value of the div where we've got our selected input element of the div. And if we do text content, and there is a number of ways, there's inner HTML, inner text. So there's a number of ways of selecting that content, and it's going to return back the current value. As we're able to retrieve back values, we're also able to assign values. And the DOM elements work in the same way as other objects in JavaScript, where if we wanted to make a selection, so we can get the select input value, so this is the same one that we've output here on the right-hand side in the console, and we can update it to whatever the value is, and we can also do it the other way around. So we can take the select element, inner HTML, text content, or inner text. I use text content in this instance. So what's going to happen now within the code, whenever we click the button, so we've still got that button action active, we're going to update the content that's contained within that SEL element object that's connected to the div on the page. And the value that we're going to set in there is going to be whatever value is contained within SE input value. And we saw that we can retrieve that value back. So this retrieves back a string value. So let's do a refresh and hit submit. And you can see that we've updated the value of the input using the submit button. So whenever this value updates, whenever our input changes, we can hit submit and we could update the value within the inner HTML. If you go to inspect, you can see that the DOM has updated, and within the div, this isn't within the original source, but it's the current active source now that we've updated it. So because this is connected to the DOM, our elements variables are connected to the same DOM objects. And then when we make any updates, you can see it gets updated within the page. So go ahead and try this out. We're going to create a more interactive format to connect to elements and the DOM. So that's still to come in the upcoming lessons. Hi, and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to add a few more inputs into our input area so that we can update some elements and element content. So let's add in another input, and this input is going to be background color of the element. We're going to also adjust the style properties of the element. So background, I'm just going to do some simple text here in order to indicate what this field is going to be for. So this type, and I'm going to use HTML5. So using the color selector, and we can call this background, BG. And I'll add in another line break and create another input. And this input is also a color, and this is going to be the text color. So it's going to update the color value of the field, of the input. And I'll move the submit button to the bottom. So we're still going to be using that main div on our screen, and we're going to be updating it dynamically with JavaScript. And the way that we want to do that is we want to still add in that button. So whenever that submit gets pressed, and I'm going to update some of the values here contained within the HTML. So just call this update. And this is no longer going to be a first name. This is going to be output. And then as we update it, we got to make sure that we're updating the corresponding values in JavaScript as well, so that we're still able to make those element selections. So now we've got a little bit more content available to us, and just double check that we're still getting that same input. So that one is still connected, and we're going to update the contents whenever we're updating and making the click. So we've got all of this information. We can get rid of it because we already know which element we're making the update to. So if we were to take the element, so this represents the selected element, and this is the only div that we have on the page. So if we output, and I'll just clear this up. So if we have our selected element, so just as we can select the element, we can also update its style. We can update its background. I'll make this bigger. We can update its background properties as well as its text properties. And Chrome is giving me the drop-down option here, so we can set the background color. And if we want to set it to blue, all we have to do is equal it to blue. And you can see it updates immediately within the DOM. You can also update the text color, so the same way, updating the style attribute. And in this case, we're going to update the color value. So that's going to represent the font color. So if we wanted to update it to white, we could update it to white. And there's a ton of different options that you can see when you're selecting style. And even in Chrome, there's a lot of options and drop downs. So you can update your background colors, you can repeat it, you can update your border. And just as you would with any of the CSS, you've got all of these options. You can do column widths, and there's just really pretty much anything you do with styling you can do here within JavaScript. You can also update the padding if you want. So setting all of the padding to 5 pixels, and that gave us more padding. So now when we go back to the element, you can see that within the element itself, we've updated the style property. So we've given a background color of blue, we've given a color of white, padding of 5 pixels, and now that's present. So just as we were updating the inner text, we can also update these color values. So let's go ahead and make those updates. So selecting those input values, so we need to also select those inputs. So this one will be select background, and we're selecting the element with the name of background, the input with the name of background. And we're also selecting the element with, so we can call this one text and the name of text, so that we know what we're referencing. And within the console, let's output the value that's contained within the background. And we'll also output the value that's contained within the text, the SC text, and outputting the value of that object. So just as we did with the input, where we've got the text value contained within the input, we're going to retrieve back these color values. So these are HTML5, and this gives us an automatic color picker that we can use in order to update colors. So let's do that, and we'll try that out. So we can set a different color here. You can also set a default color if you want. And then now when I press update, you're going to see that we're outputting the background color, and we're also updating that text color. So if we want to update that and we want to update it to blue, we can update it that way. And now when we do update, you're going to see that the new color values are present within those inputs. So now it's a matter of, just as we saw here, where we can get that element. So we select the element and apply its style properties. So using the style method, and the value that we want to update is the background color. So selecting the object properly, we need to just simply apply the value of SC background. So that's that input value, and we're applying the background color to that. And we're also going to do the same thing for text. So updating, in this case, it's not background color, it's just going to be color. And we're updating it to whatever the values contained within here. And I'm also going to set some defaults here. So I'll set a default value of, we'll use a hexadecimal var, so that's black. And actually, let's change this to white, because the default value is white and this is black. So see that we've got white, so we can make an update and update the text color. And as soon as we update it, you see that that value of that input updates as well. And this is all done via JavaScript. And then you can set these colors to whatever you want, and every time you press update, you're going to see that it is actually updating the element style attribute values. So go ahead and add this into your project, try it out, and coming up, we're going to extend on this functionality. We're going to extend on the functionality. Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can add and update classes. So far, the updates that we've done has been within the style attribute. So when you open up your element inspector in your browser, you can see that it's updating the background color and the color to the different values that have been represented within the form, as well as we're updating the inner text that's contained within the input field, and we're updating that as well. So in this lesson, we're going to add in a class. So let's create, and we can just call this one bigger. So this is going to be a class called bigger, and when it's applied, it's going to have a really big font size. And we'll also update the font family. So whenever we add in this class, and the objective is going to be to add and remove the class. So whenever we click the button, what we want to do is take that element and using select element and then the class list value of the object. And what this is going to return back, a list of all of the class that's available there. So if I was to output that now, you're going to see that we've got an empty class list. So what we want to do is we want to toggle that class. And the class that we want to toggle is going to be named bigger. And I'm going to show you what's going to happen here, that every time I press that update button, it's toggling the class. So if you go back to the element, you're going to see that the class bigger now is added. And of course, you can see that visually as well. If I click it again, it's going to remove out that class. We'll add it in. And now if I go in and if I type in that class list, so going into that select element and class list, you can see that what's available within the class list is we've got a number of classes, and actually we only have this one class, so we have the class bigger. And what it's doing is every time the button is clicked, every time this event is triggered, it runs this block of code and it's triggering the toggling of the class. So we can remove the class, we can add the class, or we can toggle the class using the class list method. So go ahead and try this, add this into your project. So there's more DOM element manipulation coming up. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to create a drop-down with a number of different classes that we can select from and add these classes in and also remove them as well. So we can toggle the classes depending on the list. So padded can be another class that we can have. And this class will add in some padding. And we'll do one more class. And you get the idea. You can do quite a bit of different classes here. And then next we need to construct our drop-down. So this can be a 3-pick border. How about we make it dotted and we'll make it blue. So going down to where we've got our selection process, let's go ahead and create a drop-down, and we can call it toggle classes. And this is going to be a select element, and I'll give it a name of classes. And we're going to populate this with JavaScript. So to make things more interesting, and of course we do want to focus on JavaScript as much as possible. So let's first take an array, and the array is going to list out all of the classes. So we can call this class array, and we'll first have the first item as blank, and we'll loop through, we'll iterate through the available classes. So we've got padded class, we've got the bigger class, and then we also have the border add class. So I'm just using the same class names that I have up here, and I've just put them into the array. So when we output class array, you can see we've got a listing of all of the classes there. So we're not able to dynamically get those. We're outputting them here within the class list. So what we want to do is add these into the dropdown. So we already saw that we've got an event listener. So there's another event listener that we're going to introduce, and that's the DOM content loaded. And if you're familiar with jQuery, this is the same event listener that makes sure that the document is ready. So this is DOM content loaded. And usually I do apply this event listener whenever I want to make sure that the DOM content has loaded. So as the name indicates, we want to make sure that the element is present before I try to add content to it. And we do have this select drop down. So I want to select that and I want to update that content dynamically. We can also add in that select, or we can call it select classes. And then using the document query selector, let's select that element. So this is a select element. And we can also, just as we did with the inputs, we can specify the name that we're looking for. So this one has a name of classes, and we'll just close that off. So we can just always double check to make sure that we did get the right element. So we do have the right element. So now we're ready to add to that element. We can use a for loop to iterate through all of the class list array. So using the class list array, we can use for each, and that will execute each one of the elements in the array with the function that's provided. So adding in a function, and we can give it a name of item. And then if we console log out item, you're going to see in the console, we're going to see all of the items that are available within the class list array. So what it's doing is it's iterating through, it's got 4 items in there, and it's outputting those item values. So we can use those to construct our options in our select list. And there's a number of ways to do this. And usually the way that I usually like to do it is I'll create the object, the element. So using document create element method in JavaScript, you can create whichever type of element you want. And in this case, we want to create an option because we know with the select list, we've got options, and each option is going to have a value associated with it, as well as we've also got the value that the user is able to see. So we're able to set two different values. So as we iterate through, and just as we selected the values of the inputs, we can select those values. So we can select it to item. So what's going to happen here, the value that's shown to the user is going to be this one here, and this one here, and this one here. And also, let's update the inner HTML of the item. So we'll update that as item. I'm going to move this down. So this is right down at the bottom. Clean that up. So lastly, what we want to do is we want to append this option, this value. So if I output option, this is the element that we're constructing. You can see that we're constructing these options. So all we have to do is add them into the cell classes object. And the way that we can do that is we use a method called append child. And this is actually going to add these freshly created options to the select dropdown. So when we go here, you can see that now they've all been added. And if we go inspect, you can see that it's available now within the HTML. And these are all the options that we dynamically created with JavaScript. I'm also going to add in a line break here. And this is fairly dynamic because now whenever we make these selections, we can automatically add that into the class. And there's one other thing before we conclude, and that's getting the value that's contained within that drop-down list. And in order to do that, we can do the cell classes and getting the value of that. I'll remove out the other ones. And you're going to see that whatever I've selected now, and when I press update, you're going to see that the class is in that value. So we can take that value and instead of hard coding bigger, we're going to dynamically update whatever class value is here. So we can see we can add the padding, we can add bigger. If we want to remove bigger, we just toggle it. And this, in this case, we need to remove out the blank option. You can't toggle a blank class. So if you're simply adding and removing classes, you might want to have blank there if you're updating the class list in its entirety. And if you're adding and removing classes, you can do this as well with the update. So go ahead and make this and add this into your project and build out that option dynamically using JavaScript, construct those elements with the dropdowns, and as well add it in and add the functionality into your element updater. So more to come in the upcoming lessons on how to interact with the DOM, select elements, manipulate elements dynamically using JavaScript. Welcome back. So what if we had more than one element and we had different types of elements? So let's create a main div and give it an ID of main. This is where all of the main action is going to take place. And we're going to loop through and update, select all of the elements contained within the main element. And this could also have a paragraph, as well as it could have a span and any type of element. So what we want to do is we want to load all of the elements that are contained within a main, and we want to create a node list with those, and all using JavaScript. So what that's going to do is that's going to build out an element list of all the current available elements on the page or that are contained within main. I'm going to get rid of this console option, the console log messages, as we want to clear that up. So just make sure that they're not there. Do a quick refresh, do an update. So everything is still updating and working properly. But in this case, I want to select any one of these elements that are available. So we don't have just one element that we're always selecting. So we want to make this more dynamic. And currently we're selecting the div, and we've got more than one div. So we will potentially have some problems with these elements. And as stated before, if we're just selecting the div, then we're automatically selecting that main element, and that's going to represent that first div there that's available on the page. So let's make this more dynamic. And the way that we're going to do that is within the document content loaded function. So here we're looping through each one of the available array class values, and we're outputting those. And we can also list out all of the elements. So let's create a main container, and this will be our main, we can call it node lister. We're going to contain all of the main node contents so that we can utilize this in any one of the functions. So I made it global and we can access that globally. So if we do node lister, and right now it's undefined, there's no content in it. So let's select all of the elements that are contained directly within the main object. We'll clear this out and I'll do it here within the console first. So using document, the document object, query selector, we want to select all of the elements contained within main. So main in itself is going to have an ID. So we can select that element with the ID of main. So we are able to make that selection. But we actually want to select all of the applicable elements. So we're using query selector all, and this creates a node list. As you can see here, it's going to return back a node list, and I only have the one node that represents the div. So let's fine tune this. In the same way as you would with CSS, you can specify that you want to select all of the nodes that are directly under main. So if we do add any more dynamically, it's going to list all of those out. So you can see when we use query selector all, we get a node list, and we've got each one of the available nodes in the list is being shown here within the node list. So let's do the same thing within our code, where we're going to bring this selection into the code and attach it to an object, and we can call this the node lister object. So this is that one that we created, and we can equal that to be equal to that. So now whenever I refresh, and if I output node lister, we're going to see we're going to get a listing of all the available elements on the page that are contained within the main ID element. So the same way as we loop through the class list, we can loop through a node list. So node list isn't exactly an array, but some of the things behave the same way. So if we want to iterate through a list of them, we could do the same thing as we did here with the for each loop. So looping through, we can take the node lister and use for each and loop through each one of the current elements that are available within the node list. And we can also console out each one of those items. So we can see that now when we refresh, we've got each one of the elements being represented here on the page. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to have a drop-down list so the user can actually select the elements dynamically and then apply these properties to them. So we're going to do that in the upcoming lesson. So for now, try query selector all, select the element main, and then select all of the elements that are directly beneath main and return that into a global object called node lister, and then you can loop through node lister and output each one of those element objects. So they're ready to use, and they're in the same state as if we made the selection with query selector, as we've attached to that instance of that element in the document object model. So that means that we can manipulate it, we can update it, and we can do a whole bunch of really neat things. So that is all yet to come in the upcoming lessons.